This video is audio content only. It does not contain any video footage or images. If you are expecting visual content, please be aware. This is intentionally provided in an audio-only format. We recommend listening to the audio rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding. Welcome to this deep dive into the extraordinary story of Homo longi, famously known as Dragon Man. Hidden in an abandoned well for 85 years, this massive fossil is now reshaping our understanding of human history. In this narration, we'll journey from a secret wartime discovery in Harbin to the cutting edge of molecular science. We will explore the skull's titanic anatomy, its link to the mysterious Denisovans, and a million-year-old secret that challenges the very timeline of our origins. Prepare to meet the long-lost relative who changed everything. Chapter 1. The Secret of the Well. The story of the fossil, now widely known as the Dragon Man, begins not in a pristine archaeological laboratory, but in the muddy banks of the Songhua River during a period of intense geopolitical turmoil. It is a narrative involving wartime invaders, a secret buried for generations, and a deathbed confession that would eventually reshape our understanding of human history. To understand how this massive cranium remained hidden from the world for 85 years, we must travel back to 1933 in the city of Harbin, located in the northernmost province of China, Heilongjiang. At that time, the region was known as Manchuria and was under the occupation of the Japanese Empire, which had established the puppet state of Manchukuo. In Harbin, a local laborer was employed in the construction of the Dongjiang Bridge for the Manchukuo National Railway. While working near the riverbank, his shovel struck something unusual embedded in the sediment. As he cleared away the river mud, he realized he had uncovered a nearly complete human skull. Even to an untrained eye, the find was extraordinary. The cranium was of such immense proportions and rugged features that its significance was immediately apparent to the man. The timing of this discovery was critical. Only 4 years earlier, in 1929, the discovery of Peking Man near Beijing had ignited a massive wave of public and scientific interest in paleoanthropology across China. This event had been widely publicized, and the laborer likely recognized that such a find was of immense value and national importance. However, the circumstances of the occupation created a profound dilemma. If he turned the skull over to his Japanese supervisors, it would almost certainly be taken out of the country or claimed by the occupying authorities. In an act of quiet resistance and foresight, the man decided to keep the discovery a secret. He wrapped the heavy skull carefully to protect it and transported it back to his family home. There, he sought a place where it could remain undisturbed and undetected by the authorities. He chose an abandoned well on the family homestead, a traditional Chinese method for concealing treasures during times of conflict. He lowered the skull into the darkness of the well and covered it, perhaps never imagining that it would remain there for the better part of a century. As the decades passed, the world above the well changed violently and repeatedly. The laborer lived through the Soviet invasion of Manchuria at the end of World War II, the Chinese Civil War, and the establishment of the People's Republic of China. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, including the period of the Cultural Revolution, the man remained silent. His reasons for this continued secrecy were rooted in survival instincts. Because he had worked for the Japanese-aligned railway during the occupation, he feared that revealing the skull and explaining its origins would lead to accusations of collaboration with the former invaders. To tell the story of the skull was to admit to his former employment, a move that could have been catastrophic for him and his family. The laborer eventually became a farmer, carrying the secret of the well into his twilight years. It was only in 2018, as he lay on his deathbed, that he finally decided to unburden himself. He spoke to his grandchildren, telling them about the treasure he had hidden in the well more than 8 decades earlier. Following his directions, the family returned to the old well and recovered the fossil. It was remarkably well preserved, having been shielded from the elements and the chaos of the 20th century by the very earth that had once held it. Later that year, the family contacted Ji Qiang, a prominent paleoanthropologist at Hebei Geo University. The initial meeting was shrouded in anonymity. The man who made the call refused to give his name at first, eventually meeting Ji Qiang in a hotel to hand over the specimen. After the handover, the donor changed his phone number and became unreachable, leaving the scientific community with a priceless fossil but a very mysterious history. Eventually, the family was persuaded to donate the skull to the Geoscience Museum at Hebei Geo University, where it could finally be subjected to rigorous scientific scrutiny. However, the unusual circumstances of the skull's discovery presented a major hurdle. In archaeology and paleontology, the context in which a fossil is found, its stratigraphic position, the surrounding sediment, and any associated animal remains is often as important as the fossil itself. Because the Harbin skull had been removed from its original site in 1933 and kept in a well for decades, it was effectively a fossil without a context. This led to significant skepticism within the scientific community. Ji Qiang himself noted that the grandfather story might have been a convenient fiction or a form of self-protection. Under modern Chinese law, all paleontological relics are state property. If the grandson had found the skull himself or acquired it recently without reporting it, he could have faced legal repercussions. By attributing the find to a deceased ancestor from the 1930s, the family could claim they were simply fulfilling a historical legacy. To resolve these doubts and verify the provenance of the skull, a team of geologists and geochemists embarked on a high-tech detective mission. They needed to prove that the skull actually originated from the Harbin area and determine its true age without the benefit of seeing it in its original burial layer. They turned to a suite of sophisticated analytical techniques, including X-ray fluorescence, rare earth element analysis, and strontium isotope testing. The researchers began by examining the physical evidence still clinging to the skull. Despite being cleaned over the years, trace amounts of sediment remained trapped within the intricate cavities of the cranium, specifically within the nasal chamber. This dirt was a geological fingerprint. By analyzing the chemical composition of this sediment and comparing it to the known rock formations in the Harbin region, the scientists were able to narrow down its origin. The chemical signatures pointed directly to the Upper Huangshan Formation, a sequence of river-deposited sediments found near the Dongjiang Bridge where the laborer had claimed to be working. Further validation came from comparing the skull to other mammalian fossils that had been recovered from the same vicinity over the years. Around the Dongjiang Bridge, various fossils of Ice Age animals had been found in the same formation. These included the giant deer Cynomagaceros ordicianus, the buffalo Bubulus wanshaki, and the giant beaver Trogantherium. The geochemical analysis of the Harbin skull showed that it shared the same rare earth element distribution and strontium isotope ratios as these other fossils. This confirmed that the skull had indeed been fossilized in the same environment and at roughly the same time as the local extinct megafauna. It was not a modern forgery or a fossil brought in from a distant region. It was a genuine product of the Middle Pleistocene river system of northeast China. Dating the fossil directly presented its own set of challenges. The team utilized uranium series dating, a method that measures the radioactive decay of uranium isotopes absorbed by the bone from groundwater after burial. By taking tiny samples from different points on the cranium, they established a reliable age range. The statistical analysis provided a minimum age of at least 146,000 years, with other geological correlations suggesting the skull could be as old as 309,000 years. This age placement put the Harbin individual in the late Middle Pleistocene, a dynamic era when multiple human lineages were potentially roaming the Earth simultaneously.
The successful verification of the skull's provenance was a triumph of modern forensic geology. It transformed a family legend into a scientific fact, providing the specimen with a legitimate place in the fossil record. The laborer's act of concealment, born of fear and a desire to protect a perceived treasure, had inadvertently preserved one of the most important pieces of the human evolutionary puzzle. Had the skull been processed in the 1930s, it might have been lost during the chaos of World War II or the subsequent decades of upheaval. Instead, it waited in the darkness of a well until a time when the technology existed to fully appreciate its significance and verify its origins. The mystery of the well also highlights the complexities of paleoanthropology in East Asia, a region increasingly recognized as a major crossroads for ancient human lineages. The emergence of the Harbin skull has forced a pivot toward the east, suggesting that the ancestors of this population were highly adapted to the harsh, fluctuating climates of northern Asia. As the scientific community began to process the implications of the find, the focus shifted from the drama of its discovery to the anatomical details of the skull itself. The laborer had described it as a treasure, and in a scientific sense, he was more right than he could have known. The cranium was a nearly perfect anatomical record of a lost relative, and its massive scale would soon spark a debate that reached the very heart of how we define our own species. This transition from the historical mystery of the well to the physical reality of the bone leads us directly into a closer look at the specimen's extraordinary physical characteristics.
Chapter 2: The Titan of Harbin. To look upon the Harbin cranium is to confront a physical presence that challenges our very definition of what it meant to be human hundreds of thousands of years ago. When scientists first began to measure and document this fossil, they realized they were dealing with the heavyweight champion of the ancient human world. The sheer scale of the skull is its most immediately arresting feature. It is, quite simply, the largest human skull ever discovered, belonging to any known species within our genus. To put this in perspective, the maximum length of the cranium reaches a staggering 221.3 millimeters, with a breadth of 164.1 millimeters. The naso-occipital length, a specific measure from the bridge of the nose to the back of the head, is recorded at 212.9 millimeters. If you were to place it next to the skull of a modern man, which averages about 176 millimeters in length, the difference would be jarring. This was an individual of immense physical proportions, a robust survivor from a world that demanded extreme biological resilience. The overall shape of the skull is what paleoanthropologists describe as platycephalic, meaning it is long and low. Unlike the high, rounded, globular heads we see in the mirror today, the dragon man had a forehead that receded sharply away from the face. However, this ancient silhouette is paired with a brain capacity that rivals our own. The internal volume of the skull is estimated at approximately 1,420 milliliters. This puts the dragon man's brain size firmly within the range of modern humans and the Neanderthals. Yet, a large brain does not necessarily mean a modern brain. When we look closer at the area just behind the eyes, we see a feature called postorbital constriction. This is a narrowing of the skull that indicates the frontal lobes, the areas of the brain associated with complex social behavior and executive function, were likely smaller or shaped differently than those of modern humans. This narrowing is much more pronounced in the dragon man than in ourselves or even in Neanderthals, though it is less extreme than in more ancient species like Homo erectus. It suggests a brain that was massive and powerful, but perhaps organized along more ancestral lines. Moving down to the face, we encounter the most striking and distinctive features of the dragon man. If the brain case is archaic, the face is a confusing mosaic of the old and the new. One of the most dominant features is the supraorbital torus, or the brow ridge. In the dragon man, this ridge is a massive, continuous bar of bone that shades the eyes like a permanent visor. It measures 145.7 millimeters across, making it the longest brow ridge of any known human fossil. It is thick, gently curved, and heavily developed, far exceeding the subtle ridges found in modern humans. Beneath this imposing brow are eye sockets, or orbits, that are unlike almost any other in the human fossil record. They are not the rounded or slightly oval shapes we are used to. Instead, they are large, deep, and remarkably square. This blocky architecture gives the face a look of incredible strength and permanence. Between these eyes sits a very wide interorbital area and a nasal bridge that is flat and recessed. This leads to a nasal opening that is exceptionally large. Scientists speculate that this enlarged nose might have been a critical evolutionary adaptation. Living in the frigid environments of northern China during the Middle Pleistocene, an oversized nose would have been essential for warming and humidifying the freezing, dry air before it reached the lungs. Despite the massive scale of these features, the face itself is surprisingly flat. In most ancient human species, the face tends to jut forward in a muzzle-like fashion, a trait known as prognathism. But in the dragon man, the face is tucked back under the brain case. The cheekbones are flat and low, and the canine fossa, the depression on the maxillary bone, is notably shallow. This reduced mid-facial prognathism is a characteristic that modern humans share. Yet in the dragon man, it appears in a much more robust and wide-set package. It is as if the blueprint for a modern human face was stretched and reinforced to fit onto a much larger, more ancient frame. However, this flatness is interrupted by a specific mosaic detail, alveolar prognathism. While the midface is retracted, the tooth sockets for the incisors are angled outward, creating a slight protrusion at the very base of the upper face that hints at its archaic roots. The mouth and jaw of the dragon man continue this theme of robust specialization. Although the lower jaw was not found with the Harbin skull, the upper jaw reveals a wide palate and large tooth sockets. Only one tooth remains in the cranium, the upper left second molar, but it tells a significant story. This molar is enormous, measuring 13.6 millimeters in length and 16.6 millimeters in breadth. For comparison, the average dimensions of modern human molars are approximately 10.2 millimeters by 11.8 millimeters. The dragon man's teeth were built for a demanding diet, likely involving tough vegetation and meat that required significant processing. The tooth is heavily worn and nearly flat, suggesting a lifetime of intense use. Interestingly, this molar also displays taurodontism, a condition where the pulp chamber of the tooth is enlarged and the roots are shortened, a trait frequently seen in archaic human populations. The back of the skull, the occipital region, also provides clues that distinguish the dragon man from other groups. In Neanderthals, the back of the head often features a distinct bulge known as an occipital bun, and a small depression called a suprailiac fossa. The dragon man lacks both. Instead, the back of his head is more rounded, with a weakly defined sagittal keel running along the midline of the occipital bone. Unlike the keels found on the Dali or Hualong specimens, this ridge is faint and does not run across the entire midline of the skull. This area is broad and robust, providing a wide surface for the attachment of powerful neck muscles needed to support such a heavy and forward-leaning head. The base of the skull reveals further anatomical distinctions. The foramen magnum, the large hole where the spinal cord enters the brain, is wider and positioned more anteriorly than in Neanderthals. This placement confirms he was fully bipedal, walking upright just as we do. But the forward position suggests a different balance of the head on the neck. Nearby, the tympanic plate, a part of the temporal bone surrounding the ear canal, is described as flat and thin. This lacks the robustness seen in Homo erectus, marking another point where the dragon man diverges from more primitive ancestors. By examining the degree of wear on the single remaining tooth and the way the sutures, the joints between the cranial bones, have fused, researchers have been able to create a profile of the individual who possessed this skull. He was likely a male, as indicated by the extreme robustness of the bone and the prominent muscle attachment sites. He was probably around 50 years old at the time of his death, a significant age for an individual living in the challenging conditions of the Middle Pleistocene. But what did he look like in life beyond the bone? To provide a modern visual answer, anthropologist Cicero Moraes utilized high-resolution CT scans of the Harbin cranium to create a digital facial approximation.
This reconstruction offers a vivid representation of the individual, transforming the fossilized remains into a recognizable human face that bridges the gap between ancient bone and a living presence. When combined with genetic data from related populations, these models suggest a formidable figure. He likely had a skin tone ranging from medium dark to medium light, with dark hair and dark eyes. This range of speculation acknowledges the genetic reconstructions of related groups from the same period. His physical build would have been Neanderthal-like in its strength, thick-set, broad-chested, and heavily muscled. This was a body designed for heat retention and physical power, perfectly suited for the mammoth steppes of northern Asia.
To understand the full anatomical context of the dragon man, we must also look at related fossils that preserve parts of the body the Harbin skull does not. One of the most important comparisons is the fossil skeleton found at Jinyushan in China. This find includes not just a cranium, but also vertebrae, ribs, a pelvis, and limb bones belonging to a female individual from the same general time period and lineage. The Jinyushan female was remarkably large for an ancient human woman, with an estimated height of about 168 centimeters, nearly 5 feet 6 inches, and a weight of roughly 78 kilograms, or about 173 pounds. She was broad-bodied and robust, with a pelvic structure that suggests a wide, powerful trunk. If she represents the average for females in this lineage, then the males, like the one from Harbin, would have been truly massive, potentially standing taller and weighing significantly more. This robust body plan was likely a direct response to the environment. The dragon man lived during a time when the Earth's climate was swinging between warmer interglacial periods and brutal ice ages. In the region of Harbin, winter temperatures today can drop to -16 degrees Celsius, and during the glacial periods of the Pleistocene, it would have been even more extreme. A large, thick-set body is more efficient at retaining core heat, and a massive skull with wide nasal passages would be better at processing freezing air. Every square eye socket, every millimeter of the thick brow ridge, and every massive molar was a tool for survival in a world of woolly mammoths and giant deer.
Another fascinating detail found on the Harbin skull is evidence of the individual's life history. There are shallow indents on the left side of the skull, near the top, which researchers believe may be healed injuries. These are the marks of a life lived in a dangerous environment, perhaps from a fall, an encounter with a large animal, or a conflict with another human. Furthermore, the upper jaw shows that his third molar, or wisdom tooth, was either very small or completely absent. This is a trait we often think of as modern, yet here it is in a 146,000-year-old archaic skull. It shows that even in these extremely robust populations, some of the dental trends we see in ourselves were already beginning to emerge. When we synthesize all these details, the dragon man emerges as a biological marvel. He represents an evolutionary path that took the best of both worlds, the cognitive potential of a massive brain and the physical durability of an archaic body. His face, with its modern flatness and ancient strength, is a bridge between the distant past of Homo erectus and the eventual emergence of modern humans. The Harbin skull is not just a relic. It is a map of a successful and highly specialized human experiment that dominated the vast expanses of East Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. The complexity of these physical traits and the sheer scale of the Harbin find naturally led to questions about where exactly this individual fits into the broader story of human origins. While the bones provide a clear picture of his appearance and physical capabilities, they also sparked a scientific mystery that would require more than just calipers and measuring tapes to solve. The unique features of the dragon man seem to echo fragments of other fossils found across the continent, from the high mountains of Tibet to the islands of the south. This anatomical puzzle was the first step toward a much larger realization about a group of humans that had, until recently, been known to science only through the invisible traces of their genetic code. The physical details of the Harbin skull provided the necessary framework for a breakthrough that would eventually link this massive, robust individual to one of the most enigmatic ghost lineages in human history. For 15 years, the Denisovans were the ultimate ghosts of human evolution. Unlike the Neanderthals, whose robust skeletons have been studied for over a century and a half, the Denisovans were a people known almost entirely through the invisible language of their genetic code. They were first identified in 2010 not by a skull or a limb bone, but by a microscopic sample of DNA extracted from a tiny fragment of a juvenile finger bone found in the Denisova Pieve in Siberia. This find revealed a population that was a sister group to both modern humans and Neanderthals, sharing a common ancestor approximately 1.38 million years ago. Since that initial discovery, archaeologists had sifted through the soil of caves and the sediments of the ocean floor, finding only a few teeth, a piece of a rib, and a handful of jaw fragments. They were a lineage without a face, until the massive skull from Harbin provided the physical anchor for the molecular data. The identification of the Harbin cranium as a Denisovan was the result of a scientific convergence in the summer of 2025 that utilized the most advanced tools of paleoproteomics and ancient DNA sequencing. To bridge the gap between the physical shape of the skull and the genetic identity of the Denisovans, researchers needed molecular evidence from the bone itself. This was a daunting task. The skull's age and its complex handling history made the recovery of ancient genetic material seem like a near impossibility. Initial attempts to extract DNA from the petrous bone of the inner ear, usually the most reliable reservoir for ancient genetic material, were unsuccessful. The genetic material had degraded too far over the at least 146,000 years the bone had spent in the ground. However, a team of geneticists led by Chao Mei Fu turned their attention to a substance that acts as a microscopic time capsule, dental calculus. This calcified dental plaque traps host cells in a mineralized matrix, protecting them from the environment. In a landmark achievement, researchers managed to recover mitochondrial DNA from the tartar adhering to the single remaining molar in the Harbin skull. The team successfully sequenced 64 base pairs of the hypervariable region, along with portions of 2 coding genes. The results were definitive. The Harbin individual shared 27 specific gene variants found only in the known Denisovan population. This genetic signature placed the individual squarely within the Denisovan clade, specifically linking him to an early group that had inhabited the Altai Mountains of Siberia between 217,000 and 106,000 years ago. While the DNA provided the primary evidence, a second breakthrough in paleoproteomics added a crucial layer of confirmation. Proteins are generally more stable than DNA, surviving in environments where genetic material has long since vanished. By using tandem mass spectrometry, LC megasiemens per megasiemens, researchers extracted and sequenced 95 different endogenous proteins from the Harbin skull. This technical feat identified the most reliable Denisovan-derived protein variant, COL1A2-9996K, while 2 other markers, COL18A11033R and CO26A1196G, were also detected. They were excluded from the final strict reliability analysis to ensure the highest scientific certainty. This proteomic analysis did more than just identify the lineage. It allowed for the sexing of the fossils. By identifying the amylogenin protein, which is found on the Y chromosome, researchers confirmed that the Harbin individual was male. This same technique was applied to the Penghu-1 mandible, a jawbone dredged from the seafloor off the coast of Taiwan. The study identified over 4,000 amino acid residues from 51 different proteins, confirming that the Penghu specimen was also a male Denisovan.
This molecular link unified disparate fossils across the continent, proving that the Denisovans were a widespread and successful population, ranging from the freezing steppes of the north to the subtropical coastal regions of the south. This vast reach is reflected in the genomes of modern people in island Southeast Asia. Malaysians and Aboriginal Australians carry the highest levels of Denisovan DNA, estimated at approximately 4 to 5%, marking the furthest extent of this ancient influence. The 2025 breakthroughs also addressed the smoking gun of interbreeding. While geneticists had long known that modern humans carry Denisovan DNA, the ultimate proof of the lineage's interactions came from Deni, or Denisova 11. Deni was a first-generation hybrid, a girl with a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. The Harbin skull provided the anatomical context for the father side of that union. By comparing the molecular markers of the Harbin skull with the genetic data from Deni, scientists could finally visualize the physical traits that were being passed between these diverging human groups.
However, the recovery of this molecular data was not without controversy. The handling history of the Harbin skull, which had been moved from a riverbank to a well and eventually through various hands before reaching a museum, raised significant concerns about modern contamination. Si Jun-ni, the original describer of the skull, famously suggested that any DNA found might actually be his own, given how frequently he had handled the specimen during his initial analysis. To counter this, the genetic teams employed rigorous protocols to filter out modern sequences. They focused on the specific patterns of cytosine to thymine deamination, a chemical damage signature that only occurs in truly ancient DNA. The fact that the 27 gene variants identified were unique to the Denisovan population and absent in modern humans provided the final defense against the contamination argument. This molecular identification had profound consequences for our understanding of the human family tree, confirming the 1.38 million-year divergence from the Neanderthal lineage. This deeper timeline suggests that the Denisovans were not a late-arriving sister group, but a long-standing, stable presence in Asia that evolved in parallel with other lineages for over 1 million years. The Harbin skull, as the first complete cranium of this group, revealed that the Denisovans had achieved a level of physical and cognitive development that rivaled our own ancestors during the same period.
The successful identification of the Harbin skull ended the era of the ghost lineage. It provided the physical evidence needed to anchor the abstract world of ancient DNA to the solid reality of the fossil record. We can now see the Denisovans as a robust and highly successful people who dominated the heart of Asia for millennia. Their blood still flows in the veins of millions of people today, and their genetic legacy has provided modern humans with critical evolutionary advantages. This includes the EPAS1 gene for high-altitude breathing in Tibetans, genes for cold metabolism in the Inuit, and immune system enhancements in Papua New Guinea. Their face, at long last, has been revealed through the mirror of molecular science. The resolution of the Denisovan enigma also provided a new framework for exploring the even deeper roots of our species. By identifying the Harbin skull as a representative of a lineage with such ancient origins, scientists were encouraged to look further back in time, searching for the ancestors who first gave rise to this remarkable group. This search would lead them to a group of even older fossils in central China that held the key to a million-year-old secret.
Chapter 4: The Million-Year Divide.
The discovery of the Harbin skull was a revelation that gave a face to the Denisovans, but it also acted as a catalyst for a much deeper investigation into the antiquity of our own lineage. For decades, the consensus in human evolution was built on a relatively tidy timeline. Most genetic models and fossil interpretations suggested that the common ancestor of modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans lived roughly 600,000 years ago. According to this narrative, an ancestral population, often identified as a species like the widespread and variable group known as the ancestors of the Neanderthals, split into two main branches. One branch eventually led to us in Africa, while the other moved into Eurasia, later splitting again to become the Neanderthals in the west and the Denisovans in the east. This 600,000-year mark was the cornerstone of the human story. But new evidence emerging from the river terraces of central China is now threatening to double that age, pushing the origins of these distinct human groups back to more than 1 million years ago.
At the heart of this radical shift are 3 fossil skulls found in the Hubei province of China, known collectively as the Yunxian Man. These fossils had a history almost as neglected as the Harbin skull was hidden. The first 2 crania, Yunxian 1 and 2, were unearthed in 1989 and 1990 from a terrace along the Han River. When they were pulled from the earth, they were in a state that made scientific analysis nearly impossible. Having been buried under the crushing weight of river sediment for 1 million years, the skulls were severely distorted, flattened, and filled with hard mineral deposits. Scientists at the time described them as looking less like skulls and more like crushed omelets. Because they were so old and so damaged, they were categorized by default as a local variety of the ancient and long-lived species known as the first humans to leave Africa. It was a convenient label that didn't require the impossible task of deciphering the distorted anatomy of a crushed fossil. For over 30 years, these skulls sat in museum collections, largely overlooked because they were considered too broken to be useful. However, in September 2025, a team of researchers utilized a suite of advanced technologies that simply did not exist when the fossils were first found. Using high-resolution CT scanning and sophisticated digital reconstruction tools, the team performed a virtual uncrushing of the Yunxian 2 skull. They segmented the fossilized bone from the surrounding rock and digitally reassembled the displaced fragments, even using intact sections from the even more damaged Yunxian 1 to fill in the gaps. When the digital reconstruction was complete, the result was a face that should not have existed 1 million years ago. The reconstructed Yunxian 2 skull revealed a unique mosaic of traits. It possessed archaic features that one would expect from a 1 million-year-old hominin, such as a long, low brain case and massive brow ridges. However, it also displayed a series of derived or more advanced characteristics that were startlingly similar to the Harbin skull. The face was surprisingly flat, with broad cheekbones and a high nose bridge, lacking the protruding muzzle-like appearance typical of other humans from that era. Most significantly, the brain capacity was estimated at over 1,100 cubic centimeters, which is exceptionally large for a specimen of that age and much closer to the brain size of the earliest modern humans. This anatomical link between the million-year-old Yunxian fossils and the much younger Harbin skull led to a revolutionary conclusion. The researchers realized that Yunxian 2 was not an example of the more primitive humans of that time, but rather an early member of the lineage that would eventually produce the Dragon Man and the Denisovans. If a member of this group was already living in central China 1 million years ago, it means that the split between their lineage and the one that led to modern humans must have happened even earlier. This single reconstruction effectively moved the goalposts of human evolution by nearly 500,000 years. This new timeline is supported by a sophisticated method of analysis known as Bayesian tip dating. This technique allows scientists to combine morphological data from over 100 different fossil specimens with molecular data from ancient and modern DNA. By calculating the rate of change in both bone shape and genetic code, the model can predict when different branches of the human family tree first diverged. The results of this analysis suggest a far more ancient and complex history than previously imagined. According to this model, the lineage that would become the Neanderthals was the first to split off from the common ancestor, occurring approximately 1.38 million years ago. The ancestors of modern humans and the group containing the Dragon Man and Denisovans remained together for a short time longer before they too went their separate ways around 1.32 million years ago. These dates are astonishing because they place the birth of our own lineage in a period of deep time that was previously thought to be occupied only by much more primitive ancestors. It suggests that by 1,000,000 years ago, the world was already home to at least 3 distinct and diverging groups of proto-humans: the proto-Neanderthals, the proto-Denisovans, and the proto-modern humans. This realization helps to resolve a long-standing puzzle in paleoanthropology known as the muddle in the middle. This term refers to the confusing array of human fossils from between 300,000 and 1,000,000 years ago that never seem to fit neatly into any one species. The new research suggests that this muddle was actually a vibrant and diverse landscape of separate lineages, each evolving unique adaptations to their environments while occasionally crossing paths and interbreeding. These dates are astonishing because they place the birth of our own lineage in a period of deep time that was previously thought to be occupied only by much more primitive ancestors. The implications of this million-year-old split also force a reconsideration of where these events took place. The traditional out-of-Africa model posits that modern humans evolved in Africa around 300,000 years ago and then dispersed to the rest of the world. While the evidence still strongly indicates that Africa is the place where our species eventually achieved its modern form, the new data suggests that the ancestor of our lineage may have emerged elsewhere. If the oldest members of the Dragon Man and Denisovan clade were firmly established in East Asia 1,000,000 years ago, and if we are their closest sister group, it raises the possibility that the common ancestor of both groups lived in Eurasia, perhaps in Western Asia. From there, one branch could have migrated further east to become the Denisovans, while another population moved into Africa to eventually become us. This theory paints a picture of Africa not just as a point of origin, but also as a destination. It suggests a far more dynamic and global story of human beginnings, where populations were constantly moving back and forth across continents, adapting to changing climates and exchanging genes and ideas. This deep history is also tied to a dramatic event discovered in the genetic code of modern people. Recent studies have identified a massive population bottleneck that occurred between 900,000 and 800,000 years ago. During this period, the global human ancestor population may have been reduced to as few as 1,300 breeding individuals, bringing our ancestors to the very brink of extinction. This bottleneck lasted for over 100,000 years and coincides almost exactly with the period of rapid diversification suggested by the Titan and Harbin fossils. It is possible that this near-extinction event was the engine of change that drove the creation of these new human lineages. The extreme environmental pressures of that time would have isolated small groups of survivors in different refugia, pockets of habitable land where they could survive the harsh glacial cycles. In these isolated communities, genetic changes would have accumulated quickly, and new physical traits, like the large brains and flat faces seen in the Titan reconstruction, would have been favored by natural selection. When the climate eventually warmed and these groups expanded again, they emerged as the distinct lineages we now recognize as the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and the ancestors of modern humans. The 5-branch model proposed by researchers simplifies the last 800,000 years of human history into a few major players. In this view, nearly all large-brained human fossils from this period can be traced back to one of 5 lineages: the Asian variety of the first humans to leave Africa, the Euro-African group, often called the ancestors of the Neanderthals themselves, the modern humans, and the Dragon Man group, which includes the Denisovans. By pushing the split of these groups back to over 1,000,000 years, the Titan and Harbin fossils provide a much longer runway for the development of the traits we consider uniquely human. This extended timeline also means that there are vast chapters of our history that remain unwritten. If our lineage began over 1,000,000 years ago, there must be proto-sapiens fossils waiting to be discovered in Africa or Eurasia that date back far earlier than the current record.
It suggests that the journey to becoming human was a much slower and more deliberate process than we once thought. The large brains, complex social behaviors, and advanced tool-making abilities that characterize our species didn't just appear suddenly. They were the result of 1 million years of refinement across multiple sister lineages.
The Yunxian II reconstruction serves as a bridge between the ancient past and the more recent discoveries of the Dragon Man. It shows that the robust, intelligent, and highly adapted humans of the Harbin region were not a sudden evolutionary fluke, but the descendants of a lineage with deep roots in the Asian continent. This group, linked to the Denisovans through the 2025 molecular breakthroughs, was a major and enduring part of the human story for over 1 million years. While the Harbin fossil itself dates to the Middle Pleistocene, the lineage it represents is thought to have persisted in parts of Asia until approximately 30 to 50,000 years ago, nearly reaching the dawn of the modern era. They were a successful and widespread people who shared a common heritage with us, evolving alongside our own ancestors in a parallel experiment in human survival. The realization that our origins are twice as old as previously believed changes the way we look at every other fossil in the human record. It turns the muddle in the middle from a source of frustration into a source of information, a window into 1 million years of evolutionary experimentation. The Yunxian fossils, once dismissed as broken and unimportant, have now become some of the most significant specimens in the world, providing the evidence needed to rewrite the timeline of our species. They remind us that the story of our beginnings is not a simple linear path, but a long and winding journey that reaches deep into the ancient heart of Asia.
This shift in perspective has also brought a renewed focus to the way we name and classify these ancient relatives. As the lines between different groups become more blurred by evidence of deep antiquity and frequent interbreeding, the scientific community has found itself in the midst of a heated debate over how to define a species. The million-year-old secret revealed by the Yunxian and Harbin fossils has not only changed our history, but has also sparked a battle over the very names we use to describe our long-lost cousins.
Chapter 5. The Battle for a Name.
In the world of paleoanthropology, discovering a fossil as complete and magnificent as the Harbin cranium is only the first step in a long and often contentious journey. Once the bone is cleaned and the measurements are taken, a much more abstract and legally complex battle begins, the battle for a name. To the public, the specimen is the Dragon Man, a title derived from its home in the Heilongjiang province, which translates to Black Dragon River. To many geneticists, it is the first complete skull of a Denisovan, a ghost lineage finally given a face. But to the taxonomists who govern the formal naming of species, the Harbin skull represents a profound challenge to the rules of biological nomenclature. This conflict is not merely about labels, it is a fundamental disagreement over how we define human diversity and how we decide when a group of ancient relatives deserves a unique identity on the tree of life. The controversy began almost the moment the discovery was announced. The team that described the skull proposed the name Homo longi, asserting that its unique combination of features made it a distinct species. This decision was itself a product of academic defiance. Professor Ji Cheng reportedly chose to publish the findings in the journal The Innovation only after rejecting demands from the journal Nature that he refrain from naming a new species. By bypassing the traditional gatekeepers who favored a more conservative approach, Ji Cheng and his colleagues signaled that they were ready to challenge the established order. However, this move was immediately met with resistance from researchers who argued that the term species was being used too loosely. This debate highlights a conflict between two competing scientific frameworks, the biological species concept and the phylogenetic species concept. In the traditional biological species concept, a species is defined by reproductive isolation, the idea that two groups are different species if they cannot produce fertile offspring. Critics of the name Homo longi point to the clear evidence of interbreeding between ancient lineages as proof that these groups should be considered populations of a single, highly diverse species rather than separate entities. The proponents of Homo longi, however, utilize the phylogenetic or morphological species concept. They argue that if a group of organisms maintains a distinct anatomical pattern over a significant period and across a wide geographic range, it deserves its own name, regardless of occasional interbreeding. To these splitters, the Harbin skull represents a unique evolutionary experiment in East Asia that is too distinct to be lumped into a broad catch-all category. They contend that using informal names like archaic Homo sapiens obscures the true complexity of the human past. Adding to the complexity is the rigid legal framework of the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature, ICZN. Under these rules, the first validly published name for a species is the one that must be used, a principle known as priority. If the Harbin skull belongs to the same species as other fossils found earlier in China, the name Homo longi might have to be discarded in favor of an older title. The primary candidate for this role is the Dali cranium, discovered in 1978 and named Homo sapiens daliensis. If researchers eventually agree that the Dali and Harbin skulls represent the same type of human, the rules of nomenclature suggest that daliensis should take priority.
However, the battle for a name often hinges on technical violations of the ICZN that can invalidate a name entirely. Some taxonomists have pointed out that the name Homo daliensis, along with Homo mapeiensis for the Maba man, may be invalid under Article 15 of the Code. This article states that names proposed conditionally after 1960 are not available for formal use. Because the original describers of these fossils suggested their names as possibilities or subspecies rather than definitive new species, they may have inadvertently disqualified their own terminology. This technicality has allowed the supporters of Homo longi to argue that their name is the first truly valid species designation for this group. Similar legal hurdles have plagued other attempts to name East Asian fossils. The Penghu 1 mandible, a jawbone found off the coast of Taiwan, was intended to be named Homo tsaichonggensis. However, the proposal failed to meet the requirements of Articles 8.5.3.1 and 8.5.3.2 of the ICZN. These rules require that names published in electronic-only formats must be registered with ZooBank, the official registry of zoological nomenclature, and include evidence of that registration within the work itself. Because the intended name for Penghu 1 appeared in a digital format without these safeguards, it remains a nomen nudum, a naked name with no standing in the scientific record.
The history of Denisovan nomenclature is littered with such naked names. Between 2011 and 2012, several researchers attempted to give the Siberian Denisovans a formal scientific identity. These proposals included Homo sapiens altiensis by Anatoly Derevianko, Homo denisoviensis by Pascal Pick, Homo denisovan by Gabriel and Mihaila, and even Homo denisova by a team led by Gunbin. All of these were eventually rejected or ignored by the wider community because they lacked a proper differential diagnosis, a detailed explanation of how the new species differs from all others, or failed to designate a formal type specimen. Without a physical standard like the Harbin skull to act as a holotype, these names were essentially scientific placeholders without legal weight. The debate took a new turn in 2024 with the proposal of the name Homo juluensis. This name, which translates to the big-headed people, was suggested as a way to group several East Asian fossils that share similar dental and cranial traits. The researchers behind this proposal argued that the Denisovans should be sunk into this new species, using the Hujayao fossils as the type specimen. This created a three-way tug-of-war between those who wanted to call these ancient Asians Denisovans, those who preferred Homo longi, and those who favored Homo juluensis.
The 2025 molecular breakthroughs linking the Harbin skull to the Denisovans intensified the question of what the correct scientific name for the entire group should be. The name Denisovan is an informal term based on a location rather than a biological description. It has never been formally established as a species name under the ICZN. This has led some prominent researchers to argue that Homo longi is actually the most appropriate formal name for the entire Denisovan lineage. In this view, the Harbin skull becomes the holotype, the physical standard for every Denisovan fossil found from Siberia to Tibet. But this solution is far from universally accepted. Many geneticists are reluctant to adopt formal species names for these groups, arguing that the concept of a species is no longer useful when dealing with closely related groups that were constantly exchanging genes. They prefer to use informal names to describe what they see as a braided stream of humanity. They worry that assigning a formal name like Homo longi creates a false sense of biological distance and obscures the deep history of interbreeding that defines our past.
The technical arguments often hinge on the most minute details of the fossil record, such as the presence of a three-rooted lower second molar. For years, this specific dental trait was considered a unique diagnostic feature of the Denisovans, as it was found in both the Siberian teeth and the Jahe jawbone. When the Harbin team used the presence of similar robust dental features to justify the name Homo longi, critics pushed back. They argued that the three-rooted molar might not be a unique Denisovan trait, a synapomorphy, but rather an ancestral Asian trait, a simplesiomorphy, that was present in many different populations. If the trait isn't unique, they argue, it cannot be used to define a new species. This taxonomic struggle mirrors efforts in Africa, such as the proposal of Homo bodoensis to resolve the muddle in the middle and replace wastebasket taxa like Homo heidelbergensis. This move mirrored the efforts of the Harbin team, as both groups were trying to replace vague historical labels with specific, scientifically defined species names. The battle for the name also has a significant cultural and national dimension. The name Homo longi is deeply rooted in Chinese geography and identity. The dragon is a powerful symbol in Chinese culture, and the identification of a unique, highly successful human lineage in East Asia is a source of immense pride for the Chinese scientific community. Some international observers have questioned whether the drive to establish a new species is influenced by a desire to emphasize the importance of the Asian fossil record, which was for a long time marginalized in a field dominated by European and African discoveries. The lead Chinese researchers have pushed back against this, insisting that their classification is based strictly on the unique anatomical evidence provided by the Harbin skull. To support the validity of the Homo longi name, researchers have relied on the conclusion that a large group of Chinese fossils, including Yunshan, Dali, Jinniyushan, and Maba, all cluster together with the genetically confirmed Denisovans. They argue that this cluster represents a single massive evolutionary clade that is distinct from both the Neanderthal and modern human lines. By grouping all these fossils under the name Homo longi, they are attempting to create a unified framework for understanding the last million years of human history in Asia.
Yet the opposition remains firm. Some paleoanthropologists argue that the anatomical variation within this cluster is too great to be a single species. They suggest that what the Chinese researchers are calling a single species is actually a complex mosaic of many different populations, some of which may have been more closely related to Neanderthals or modern humans than others. For these critics, the name Homo longi is an oversimplification of a much more chaotic reality. The 2025 arguments also brought a renewed focus on the validity of other proposed names that had been largely forgotten. This legalistic cleaning of the taxonomic house was a necessary step in the battle for a name, as it cleared the field for the primary contenders. Even as the experts argue over the rules of nomenclature, the Harbin skull continues to serve as the primary evidence for the physical appearance of this disputed group. Whether you call him a Denisovan or Homo longi, the Dragon Man has provided a tangible reality that the field cannot ignore.
The debate has forced the scientific community to confront the limitations of its own systems for naming and categorizing the past. It has highlighted the tension between the solid, measurable world of morphology and the fluid, invisible world of genetics. The resolution of this battle may ultimately depend on the discovery of even more fossils. Researchers are currently targeting specific regions in China in the hope of finding more specimens that can bridge the gaps between the existing finds. Each new find provides another set of data points for the models and another source of potential molecular evidence. In the meantime, the name Homo longi remains a powerful and controversial presence in the scientific literature. For its supporters, it is a necessary and valid recognition of a major branch of the human tree. For its detractors, it is a premature and technically flawed label that ignores the complexity of human ancestry. This battle is a reminder that science is not just a collection of facts, but a human process of interpretation and debate. The names we give to our ancestors reflect our own changing ideas about what it means to be human and how we fit into the natural world. The Dragon Man has truly shaken the foundations of paleoanthropology, not just by what he was, but by the questions he has forced us to ask. As we move forward, the focus is shifting toward an even broader understanding of the interactions between these ancient groups. The taxonomic battle is just one part of a larger effort to reconstruct the world of the Middle Pleistocene, a world where multiple types of humans coexisted and shaped each other's destinies. How will our understanding of human identity change if we finally accept that we were never the only humans on the planet? The story of the Dragon Man is more than a tale of a hidden fossil. It is a fundamental rewriting of our origins. From a secret well in Harbin to the cutting edge of molecular science, this massive cranium has bridged the gap between the ghost lineage of the Denisovans and the solid reality of the fossil record. By pushing the divergence of our ancestors back over 1 million years, Homo longi challenges the notion of a simple, linear path to modern humanity. Instead, it reveals a vibrant, braided history where multiple human species thrived, adapted, and intermingled across the vast landscapes of Asia. As we look into those square, ancient eye sockets, we are reminded that we were never alone on this journey. We are merely the last chapter in a much older, more complex story of what it means to be human. Thank you for listening.